All right, stand by. 10 seconds.
Camera one.
Talent.
Ready, camera two.
And cue talent.
One.
Roll to record.
Everyone's going nuts over Trump's Muslim ban. I'm John Phillips, and this is The Rundown. First, we had a devastating terror attack in San Bernardino, the worst on U.S. soil since 9/11, with an office Christmas party full of innocent people gunned down by a husband and wife terror team. The president and his party did everything in their power to pretend it was something other than Islamic terrorism, but when one of the killers pledges allegiance to ISIS online while the attack is happening, you just can't wiggle your way out of that one. So the president gave a bizarre primetime address from behind a lectern set up in the Oval Office to explain how everything is fine. What's his solution? Well, stay the course, of course. That's how he's handling it. Oh, but he wants some gun control, too. Here's what he had to say. Quote, Congress should act to make sure no one on a no-fly list is able to buy a gun. What could possibly be the argument for allowing a terrorist suspect to buy a semi-automatic weapon? This is a matter of national security. We also need to make it harder for people to buy powerful assault weapons like the ones that were used in San Bernardino, end quote. But the American people isn't buying it. Gun sales are booming, even in deep blue California. And according to a new CNN poll, the vast majority of us disapprove of how he's handling terrorism and the fight against ISIS. We'll talk about that in depth in the next edition of Poll Position, so be sure to check that one out. And that's why he made the speech. Democrats are in huge trouble right now on terror. The Obama White House and Hillary Clinton State Department fiddled while the Middle East went to hell. Adding to the trouble for the president, in his carefully scripted speech from the White House, he proved he had no clue how Mrs. Terrorist Tafshin Malik was allowed into the country, identifying the wrong program for reform. The White House press corps quickly issued a correction, but we're still supposed to trust that they're vetting everyone allowed into the country 100%. Please, give me a break. Enter Donald Trump, who said the following.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
And the world went bonkers. Right and left, Democrats and Republicans, foreign leaders and media pundits, all climbing over each other to try to decry Trump as a horrible fascist, racist monster. But let's go ahead and take a deep breath. He's not calling for American Muslims to be rounded up and put into camps. He's saying, let's take a moment and think about what we're doing before we allow any more potential Islamic terrorists to come here and kill us. So how does all this shake out politically? Hillary won't even say the words radical Islam. Can the Democrats recover from how badly they've handled terror? Will the outrage over his Muslim ban mean the end of Trump? Or can he ride this issue all the way to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? To explore these questions and much, much more, we're joined by our pal Scott Ott, who's a PJTV contributor and author, and here in Los Angeles, stand-up comic and PJTV contributor Stephen Cruiser. You know, Cruiser, when you look at what happened in San Bernardino, my mother was just a few buildings away from where it happened. She was on lockdown. She's a hospital administrator, was sent back to work after everything went down on the exact same route where the shootout happened in the SUV. Nobody told her what these guys looked like. Nobody told her who they were. She was really sent blind on her way back to the office. When you look at everything that happened, one of these two was an immigrant. She came from Pakistan originally. I guess they met in Saudi Arabia, and she was able to come over legally because those two were getting married. She went through a background check system that we were told by the White House was foolproof. She was clearly radicalized prior to being allowed into the country, and she was the one who was lead the charge, according to all reports that I've read. She was the first one to start firing when they entered the building. He was a little hesitant. She was loaded for bear. If we can't prevent people like this from coming into the country, why is it so asinine to say, you know what, let's take a breath, let's take a pause, let's figure out what went wrong here before we allow more potential terrorists into the country?
Well, first of all, how ridiculous is it that we're even having this conversation 14 years after 9/11? 14 years later, an entirely new layer of government created to prevent and monitor, and we're not supposed to be having this conversation. But it's to answer your question, it's part of the way things have played out here in the last several months now, because you're not allowed to have a discussion about anything Donald Trump says. You either support it completely or you denounce it completely, and anybody in the woe be unto anybody somewhere in the middle of that, because I'll say something that tries to say, well, let's look at what he says, even if I don't agree, and then I get hit by both sides, right, which is where it is right now. It's not, people are trying to say it's unconstitutional. It's not unconstitutional at all to say we want to bar certain kinds of foreigners from coming into the United States. That's perfectly legal under the rules of the Constitution. You can't do that to Americans, but so there is a conversation to be had about this. Unfortunately, the climate right now, it's impossible to have that conversation. And I'm not blaming Trump for that. There are people who are still complaining about Trump getting all the news, and they're the news people. They talk about Trump 24/7, and then they're complaining about the fact that they're talking about Trump 24/7. So it's a weird, non-communicative environment where we can't have the conversation, which is why nothing ever gets, not ever, but right now, that's why we can't have this conversation.
Scott, we know that Europe's background check system doesn't work. At least 2 of the terrorists that attacked Paris came in through the Syrian refugee program, maybe a third. The woman who shot up San Bernardino came here as an immigrant. She went through our background check system. That didn't work. Should we take a pause on immigration right now, in your opinion, now that we know that there is not a background check system available to either Europe or the United States that is foolproof when we have acts of terror being committed like this? Or we're a nation of immigrants, we're a nation of open doors, this is just the cost of doing business?
It's not an unreasonable proposal to take a pause on immigration. However, when Donald Trump got to that last sentence is when I just completely threw up my hands, because he said, let's essentially pause this until our representatives in Washington figure out what the hell they're doing. Don't hold your breath on that one, baby, because you'll die. Our representatives in Washington are not going to figure out what the hell they're doing. And because first of all, they're not all unified in what they want to do. And secondly, they don't know how to do what it is that they must do. And this is why we've got to stop this. I don't know how this has infected Republicans especially. We've got to stop this reliance upon government to say, oh, our government's got to do something. Our government can prevent this. Our government can prevent that. Our government spy agencies don't talk to each other. So how do you think we're going to get good information from agencies overseas, from police forces in Riyadh, somehow are going to give us accurate information when we can't exchange accurate information within the boundaries of our own federal jurisdiction? I don't think that there is an ultimate solution to this. I'm not absolutely opposed to saying, let's take a break for a second here. We're going to close the doors for a period of time and say, is there a way, at least have the conversation, is there a way that we can screen people coming in? And before some people watching this will jump down my throat and say, what about the poor families trying to escape the Syrian, blah, 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 blah. In most cases, people don't get to just jump from Aleppo to Detroit. They don't get here immediately. There is a delay period, in fact, a long delay period that they have to go through before they can get here. As much as I despise Donald Trump, I don't think that this is an unreasonable idea.
Why was the leftist government in France applauded when they said we're shutting our borders down after they were attacked? Why was Jimmy Carter applauded when he sent Iranian students back after what went down with the Ayatollah went down? And Donald Trump decried as a Nazi and a fascist when he suggested doing something similar? Well,
the government in France was not applauded by the American left. It was only people on the American right that were doing that a few weeks ago. The American left was peculiarly silent about that. And whenever I pressed any of them on that, no one would respond to anything. Well, just emergency, blah, blah, and then they'd run away. So it's Trump. Trump has carved out a niche for himself right now where he's bombastic and people are put off by it. So that's just the environment right now. But what Carter did then was applauded because people felt threatened. I think this narrative has gotten so strong now. They're so good at the deflection. They're so good at pretending it's something else. I think half the country really does believe the problem might be guns right now and not terrorism. The problem is there's slightly more than half the country that doesn't. In fact, this is how far off President Obama is on this. Since that speech, and I've written about both of these things over at PJ Media recently, since that speech, in just a week, Smith & Wesson shares are up 17%. Gun sales are going through the roof in California. Smith & Wesson shares are up 126% over the year so far, to give you an idea of how badly the American public supposedly wants gun control. And the other thing is on the no-fly list, that is so egregiously awful, such an assault on the Fifth Amendment, that even the LA Times editorial board came out yesterday and said, whoa, freeze, this is a horrible idea. And they said, look, and we're all pro-gun control, and we do believe that there should be bans on buying assault weapons, but this is an awful, awful idea that is just a direct assault on the Constitution.
Scott, did Donald Trump make a mistake when he came out in favor of banning all Muslims from coming into the country? Should he have said instead, look, we're not going to let anyone come into the country if you're coming from a country whose documents we can't trust for our background check, or if he were to just say, let's just have a blanket pause right now in immigration from all countries until we figure it out? Would he be in as much trouble if he went down one of those two roads instead?
Well, A, he's not in trouble at all. He's Donald Trump. There is nothing that he can say that will get him in trouble, frankly. And everything the more outrageous it may seem that he sounds, the more that will inflame certain elements of the public who say, yeah, it's about time somebody said that. Now, if he were a politician, he may have stated that in more, equitable and reasonable sounding terms like you suggest. But he also wouldn't have grabbed the headlines like he did, and he wouldn't have spurred conversation on shows like this, for that matter.
Does it hurt him that people like Reince Priebus are out there calling him every name in the book? And not just him, but it was Jeb Bush was out there calling him names. Even Dick Cheney was out there calling him names. Paul Ryan called a press conference to denounce him. Does that help or hurt him in the process?
I don't think most of it hurts him, because this entire campaign has been built upon, like, I'm not the establishment guy. So if the establishment is calling him names, it's really just going to make all of the people who love him go, yeah, see? Yeah. So that's not going to hurt.
Even Ted Cruz, though, came out against it.
Cruz came out against it a little bit. So that's the first time they've had a public disagreement about it. But I don't know that I still don't think it's good. Nothing hurts Trump with the people who like Trump. You know that. You like Trump. Nothing hurts him right now. Priebus definitely isn't going to hurt him. Paul Ryan, you kind of expect that. It's all part of this. It's all part of the press game, too, where you're supposed to denounce another Republican if you disagree with them. You have to publicly do it. The Democrats don't ever have to do it. It doesn't really matter. Jeb Bush came out and denounced him, and then they said, but then there was a big headline about, but he wouldn't say whether or not he would vote for him in the general election. So it's never enough for them. So, no, I don't think it's going to hurt him that much right now. It's the 90th, this is the one that's going to do him in that we've had in this campaign cycle, and none of them have done him in. So even The Onion had a headline about that the other day.
Scott, I was talking to a friend of mine who's a former high-ranking official at the RNC, but not an establishment type, an actual conservative who I think all of us would agree is a pretty conservative type of guy. He said what went down yesterday, what went down after Trump made this proclamation with what Reince Priebus and Paul Ryan and Jeb Bush and others did, was the establishment's chance, the establishment's effort to actually slay Donald Trump. They thought that they could do him in. This was the day, this was the time to stick the knife in him. But they've given up hope on Jeb Bush. They realize that Jeb Bush is a wet fish and isn't going anywhere. So right now is what they're doing is they're giving Marco Rubio the opportunity to shine and to show some life in the polling numbers, maybe in Iowa, maybe in New Hampshire, and put all their resources behind him. If he can't do it, my friend suggested there's going to be a serious attempt to draft Mitt Romney to jump in and get into this race, because Romney is an establishment guy that keeps those people happy, but his position on immigration is one that is in line with Trump supporters, in line with hawks on the border. That's a position where he does not have Jeb Bush's open border desires. He is definitively a hawk on that issue, and they think that that may be their only opportunity to prevent Donald Trump from winning the nomination. Your thoughts?
Listen, every time the Republican establishment thinks that there's blood in the water because Trump has done something egregious, they should look down, because what they'll see is the blood is spewing from their own leg because Donald Trump has just chewed their leg off at the knee. And they have no idea what is going on. The blood in the water is the establishment's blood. And I know we keep hearing this meme that comes up again. I don't know how many different ways Mitt Romney can say, I'm not going to run, I don't want to run, my wife doesn't want me to run, nobody wants me to run, I'm not going to do it. But we are infected with this disease where we reach for a savior, and because the main one is dead, Reagan is already buried, we can't get him, and so we're trying to find somebody. Unfortunately, we're going to the bench of losers. We're going to the bench of people who've already proven that they have difficulty winning a national election. Not to say, Romney couldn't mount a comeback. But Rubio, I like. However, the only one who's playing his cards well in this situation, really, is Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz didn't call Donald Trump crazy. Ted Cruz basically said, I disagree with this proposal, but it's worth having a conversation about this. And so when it shakes out, if Trump should have a stroke or something, and some people have to decide where they're going to go. They're not going to Jeb Bush, certainly, and they're probably not going to Marco Rubio. They're going to go to Ted Cruz, who didn't call them idiots before Donald Trump dropped out.
Scott says there's blood in the water. It's coming out of their eyes. It's coming out of their ears. It's coming out of wherever.
He makes a fantastic point about Cruz, though. The reason Cruz is in this position is, and I've written about this extensively too, is because he didn't get into the daily, I'm going to make a name for myself by battling Trump thing that all the other candidates got into. All the other candidates mistakenly thought that they could make their mark by going after Trump on something. And Cruz just stayed over here and built a campaign and saved money and didn't need to spend a lot on media to get out of his latest Trump argument, and he's just done that. So he had the cachet to come out and finally disagree with Trump, albeit not completely, on something, and still move forward. He's the one. For all the establishment caterwauling about, Cruz being a hothead who just wants to go out and be a flamethrower and everything. He's the one who's running the patient, intelligent campaign of all of the politicians right now. He's the one who's running the best one. He's the one who's running the campaign that they wish Jeb Bush could run, or even Marco Rubio is running a decent campaign but still spending a lot of money.
Stephen Cruiser, you get the last word. Don't say I didn't get you something for Christmas. That's all the time we have for today, but now it's your turn. Do you support Trump's ban on Muslim travelers to the United States, or has the Donald gone too far? Tell us what you think in the comment section below. I'm John Phillips. Thanks so much for watching The Rundown.